From courtside of the virtual hardwood, it's the NLSC Podcast, episode number 435. Andrew with you once again. I am Andrew in the forum and Andrew NLSC on Twitter. My co-host is Derek. He is Deeper3 in the forum and Deeper384 on Twitter. Derek, good to talk to you again.
No, absolutely. Happy to be here. I put out a community question, and the response was so good, and we got so many great responses that we're going to turn it into a show. So that's going to be the main topic today. The question is, if NBA Live 24 does come out next year, what would make you buy it and make the switch from NBA 2K? And if you were to get both games, what would make you spend a lot of time or more time on NBA Live 24? But before we get into that, I wanted to talk to you about our experience earlier on NBA Inside Drive 2003. So it was the first time you've ever played the game. We connected on Parsec. We talked about Inside Drive 2003 and that series in general on the last episode of the NLSC Podcast. And you had a positive experience with it, as I knew you would. I wanted you to tell our audience, how you felt about it.
Sure, and I mean, I can see why you and your brothers have been having a blast with it, quite frankly. It was very pick up and play, and that's something that's very important with any game, obviously, but with so many basketball games, and some of the weaker ones, in fact, all of the weaker ones, really, they'll have contrived controls. You get on the floor, and you're trying to figure out exactly how to do basic moves. There was none of that in Inside Drive. It was as pick up and play as the best live and 2K titles are. Very much impressed by that. The only thing that I really struggled with in that regard was the having jump for rebound and block on the same button as shoot, which a lot of old games did. That was something that was done in older control schemes. But around about that time, a lot of other games like Live and 2K were making that split where rebound was a separate button. So that took a bit of adjustment, and I was still doing it towards the end of the game, going for steals, but with the shoot button and jumping instead because of of that approach to the controls. But the fluidity was there, in some ways more fluid than NBA Live, at least in the player movement and the body animations, which was quite impressive for the time. Fantastic faces. You forget how good some of those face textures were at the time for some of those games, especially when it's upscaled in the emulator. We were playing over Parsec, obviously. Just a lot of fun. The pace was great. The dunks were very exciting. The commentary with Kevin Calabro, of course, fantastic. Some of the weaknesses that I noticed, I wasn't big on the rebounding, but you mentioned that it does take a bit of getting used to. Once you do, it's quite good. And trigger zones for dunks and layups, moves in the paint. There were a few jump shots that I pulled up for that definitely, although they went in, and I will take the basket, of course, because 2 points is 2 points. But I did want them to be a layup or a dunk. I didn't quite trigger far enough out on some of those moves. And if you get stuck behind the backboard, there's no adjustment animations. But to that point, it's no worse than a lot of games at that time. That was a common issue at the time that games have really improved upon in the almost 20 years since. Overall, that was a great experience. You do miss the right stick dribbling, which again is something else that happens when you go back far enough to a game before it had the right analog controls for dribbling and whatnot. It still works very well with the button. You can still pull off moves, but you do miss having that ability to do the precise move with a stick. But those games are still very playable. Live 2001, Live 2002, I was talking to you before we were recording, we were talking about this, and I said those games are still very playable with the button approach to dribbling moves, and so is Inside Drive 2003. So even though you can make those critiques, and it does show its age in some respects, it's up there with the Lives and 2Ks of the day.
No, I love it. And I had a feeling that you would like the game when you got your hands on the sticks. We've talked about it so many times on the NLSC podcast. The mark of a great game or a really good game, and a game that will age incredibly well, like Inside Drive has, is the pace needs to be right, and that game just has absolutely fun, exciting pace, like real basketball, and control. And you noticed that right when you picked up the sticks. In fact, after the first quarter, after the first 6 minutes, you said this game feels really solid. right? Like it felt like you were in control of the action on both offense and defense overall. And you also felt like the pace was really good. And I think that's why Inside Drive and those 2002, 2003, 2004 Inside Drives in general do age incredibly well, because it's their pick up and play. They have great pace, and you actually feel like you have control over the action. I was actually watching you off the ball, and when you saw me strip the ball, I saw you booking it down the floor with Vince Carter, because you wanted that dunk, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because the dunks are so satisfying in that game. And one huge advantage that Inside Drive 2003 actually has over a game like NBA Live 05, and I know you'll remember this because you spent a lot of time with NBA Live 05, is when your player is cutting to the hoop, or when your player is getting out on the fast break and you throw them a pass on Inside Drive, they keep running. It makes for great fast breaks. It makes for give and go opportunities, all of that. But when you're playing NBA Live 05 and you're trying to run a fast break, the majority of the time your player, the receiver, stops to catch the ball.
Yes.
And it frustrates the hell out of my brothers and I, because we should have like an easy layup, because in real life, or easy dunk, because in real life your player keeps moving off the ball. But not on that game. They stop, the defense has time to get back, and you're either blocked from behind, even though you had a lot of space in between them initially, or the defender gets right in front of you. So Inside Drive was doing a lot of things right, a lot of basketball basics things right. And I think that I feel like the title ages really well. And we also noticed, and I wanted you to touch on this too, because you were impressed by this as well, that it has some amazing stat tracking for the time. It tracks double doubles, triple doubles, quadruple doubles, and quintuple doubles during a season. And it also tracks how many players of the game a certain player had. And I've never seen a game track that. Like, they don't have like tracking player of the game in like NBA 2K22. So I know you were impressed with that.
Oh, very impressed. I mean, there are games that came after that don't track anything like that. As you said, player of the game, that may be the only title that I can remember, at least, that actually tracks that particular stat. And look, that's just a small detail, but those little details really do make the game. That's one of those cool things that you see in the stats screen and think, oh, yeah, that's pretty nice. As far as triple-doubles and double-doubles, quadruple-doubles, quintuple-doubles, yeah, it's probably one of the first to actually do that. There's some 2Ks, more recent 2Ks that haven't. 2K14, of course, which I've been playing, PS4 and Xbox One version on my PS5, that don't track it for some reason. I believe earlier versions of 2K did. I think even the last-gen version, PC version of 2K14, did track double-doubles and triple-doubles, possibly. But for some reason, it's one of those things that was just missing in the rebuild on the PS4 and X1 version. It is unfortunately missing, apart from the 25 triple-doubles to get into the Hall of Fame milestone. But again, it shows how different companies were thinking of different things at the time. And the benefit of having all those different titles was, maybe there was one that was the standout, which was usually live for a long time there. But so many of those other titles, and it's why 2K was able to eventually overtake live and become the dominant brand. But even games like Inside Drive and Shootout and whatnot were doing these special things and thinking of things that live and 2K weren't. So that's always cool to see.
It makes you want to try to get a quintuple double with like David Robinson or like Hakeem Olajuwon or something like that. I also wanted to say that one thing that's just super impressive about Inside Drive and that series in general is how much they tried to focus on authenticity. You know, in the top 10, the NLSC top 10 plays of the week that was just released, we have Vince Carter doing the first dunk he did in the 2000 slam dunk contest. And it looks absolutely excellent in Inside Drive 2003. And we even did it when we were using the Raptors in that game when we were playing co-op. I got out on the fast break and I did that dunk contest dunk, and it just looks fantastic. I do agree with you 100%. I definitely miss the right stick dribbling when I'm playing that game. I think that if that game had right stick dribbling, it would make the triple threat a lot more fun. And it's not just the dribbling. It's like what you can do when your dribble is picked up, right? Like the holding the ball behind you, quick spin, etc. I think that the one button thing works still for us. And I think part of that is because we grew up with games that either didn't even have a dribble move button or only did have one. And we found fun in those. But I love the authenticity of the game. I love the fact that it's so pick up and play, and I'm glad that you enjoyed it.
And we did get a comment on Twitter thread that remarked that it looked that a game that came out in that time period, how good it looked. And again, people do forget. Admittedly, we are playing on an emulator, so you can upscale and whatnot. And we're obviously not playing on a CRT. You know, the old TVs that didn't show these games at their full quality and the full quality of the textures. But good-looking faces in games and good textures and good graphics. I mean, yes, they are dated by today's standards when we can have very lifelike graphics. But people forget, you know, even though it was 20 years ago was early 2000s. 20 years ago we're not talking about Atari in the early 80s. We're talking about PlayStation 2 and Dreamcast and Xbox and everything in the early 2000s. So people forget that 20 years ago, you know, the technology has still come a fair way by that point.
Oh, no, 100%. And I want to point out that, like I stated before, I spent a ton of time with my friend Craig on these inside drives, 2002, 2003, 2004, back when they were new. And they looked good then, even, you know, not upscaled on PC. Like, we always thought the game looked really great. So I was happy to see that comment because it does. It is a good looking game. And people forget how good the graphics were on some of those early 2000s games. Even something like on Dreamcast, Crazy Taxi. If you ever actually, you know, looked at that game recently, that game holds up incredibly well graphically. It's also a really fun game as well. But nothing's as good graphics as Slam City, though, right, Andrew? Because Slam City is like a quick time event. It's video. So actually, the best graphic game of all time for basketball might be Slam City with Scottie Pippen.
I mean, putting aside some of the pixelated video, I suppose, at the time, absolutely. I mean, Jam It also uses digitized actors, but it's very stiff in the way it works. Again, that was something the developers were trying in the early 90s when you had CD-ROM technology, the glorious revolution of CD-ROM, where you could have more data on the disc and you could have these full-motion videos and the full-motion video games with the QuickTime events and whatnot. It's interesting to see what they've done over the years in that respect, and that was a big craze there for a while. It didn't really take off in basketball games. I mean, Slam City with Scottie Pippen, I picked it up on PC, full in box with all its wonderful feelies in stickers and a temporary tattoo still in the box. Fantastic. I'll definitely wear that. I'll definitely put that on sometime. I mean, having played Slam City with Scottie Pippen, it's probably not my favorite game, but I can also appreciate what they were going for with it.
No, absolutely. I actually want to point out, because somebody mentioned NBA Live 05, so we're talking about the mid and early 2000s games, right? Actually, Slam City, you know, is from the 90s, but earlier we were talking about the early mid 2000s games. Somebody said, you know, does NBA Live 05 work on Windows 10? And I think there's still a lot of people out there that don't understand how easy some of these games are to install on Windows 10. Games that you don't need DOSBox for or NGlide for or anything like that. Live 2005, boom, installed effortlessly on my PC. 2006, Live 07, Live 08. I just put the disk in. I put in the game's code, the game's key, and it installed, no issues, and the games are running on my Windows 10 PC. So if anybody's on the fence about getting some of the mid-2000s NBA Lives, and they're worried that, oh my God, maybe it won't work on Windows 10, or maybe I'll have to jump through hoops in order to get it installed. Those games installed with absolutely no issue, no extra programs, nothing like that. And then there was somebody that mentioned that they didn't have a CD drive in order to even use a disc game. And I pointed him towards a link for an external CD drive that plugs in via USB. They're only $20. I use one because my new computer doesn't have a CD drive, and I use this drive all the time. So $20 opens that window for you to get these mid-2000s PC games and, you know, put the disc in, install it like you have a regular internal drive, and you're up and running. It's
a little bit more convenient than console, for example, the new PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series S that don't have the versions that don't have the optical drives in them. Obviously, I've been playing NBA 2K14 for PS4 on my PS5 because I did get the model with the drive, and I did that because I did want that backwards compatibility. And unfortunately, those games are not in the stores, so you can't get the digital version again. So, if you are interested in retro gaming, definitely look into these options. It is, of course, important to have DOSBox and Nglide wrappers and sometimes even a virtual machine like VMware to install to run some of these games that won't work under Windows 10. Unfortunately, some of these games aren't working under Windows 11 as far as I've heard so far. Even in the early 2010s 2Ks aren't working under Windows 11. So that is a problem.
100%. I won't be upgrading anytime soon.
Me neither.
Just to let you know, I'm hanging on to Windows 10 as long as I possibly can.
Same.
And I also want to point out, so I posted screenshots of my collection. So I completed my NBA Live collection. So I have NBA Live 95 all the way up through NBA Live 08 on PC, all working, all running perfect on Windows 10. And thanks for the assist on that, because you actually sent me a couple of games as well that was missing from my collection. So thank you for that. And then I also have all the NBA 2Ks that were ever released on PC, 2K9 to 2K22. So if I can get all of these games, even going back to the 90s, running on my PC, looking great, working great with a controller, all of that stuff, because you've connected with me on so many of them, you can do it too. So don't like give up or think that you can't do retro gaming on your PC with some of these old games, because you can get it done.
And of course, we've still got a big library. I mean, I say big, that a lot of mods have gone missing over the years, but we've still got some very prominent mods that are still available for those older NBA Live games, especially the ones that came out in the 2000s. Unfortunately, around about 99, 2000, a lot of those early, or 2001, we have lost a lot of mods there, but we have been able to recover some. I've uploaded whatever I can find in my archives, but certainly from that heyday of modding, 2003 through to 08, still a lot of mods there. I think the 08 section is one of our biggest sections in the downloads database. Still a lot of mods, they still work. If you do come across any broken links, let me know, and I'll there's a report broken link option there. You can let me know, and I'll see if I can track them down. Sometimes mods do get lost, especially if they were hosted externally at the time. But again, this is why we have the upload facilities, so that we can preserve those mods. A lot of them already have been. So yeah, you can check them out and definitely get into that retro gaming. I mean, you can hear the amount of fun that we've been having over the past year or so, Derek. This is something we always want to impress upon our listeners, is that if you're not enjoying the latest game, go back to an old favorite. Stick with an old favorite as long as you can.
Doesn't get old, does it?
No, not at all.
I mean, every time we connect on NBA Jam on Fire Edition, it's a blast playing on the same team. It just connected today earlier on Inside Drive 2003, had a blast. You and I have played games of NBA Live 96, NBA Live 95, NBA Live 98, just such a big library of games, and it just never gets old, as a result. I had a question for you, actually. So NLSC Top 10 Plays of the Week went out, thought we had some really good submissions, a lot of great highlights. You can't choose your own highlight. I know you were in there at number 2 with the Mutombo block and the huge Sean Kemp poster. What was your favorite highlight in this week's countdown?
Obviously I loved the Vince Carter 360 windmill, because that was so unique. I always appreciate a highlight that's not a dunk, because I myself, like most people, default to a dunk as a great play in basketball, because it is a great play in basketball. Dunks are highlights. But the top play, the number one play, that full court casual fling by Stockton. I always love to see a full court shot go in a basketball video game.
Oh my God. And by the way, NBA Live 2001, it is not easy to hit those.
No.
Those are incredibly rare. I think I hit one maybe growing up. And I don't think I ever saw another one go in before I just saw that Stockton one go in. So I actually have two favorites in the top 10. 3, I'm sorry, I have 3, if that's allowed. Hey, I make the top 10, it's allowed. The Stockton heave from it's an actual full court shot. So the Stockton heave from NBA Live 2001, that went in. The Vince Carter dunk, where it's the exact same animation. that he did in real life in the 2000 slam dunk contest, which was his first dunk of the contest. And that NBA Live 18 highlight, the Kevin Durant spin move into the reverse dunk, that looked absolutely awesome. It was fluid. It was in motion. The spin made sense. It actually got around the defender, and then he finished it on the opposite side of the basket. NBA Live 18, when you know the controls and you know how to play it, that game can look and feel pretty good. And I know that you were a fan of NBA Live 18, at least, some aspects of it. I know that you were a fan.
Oh, I actually played Live 18 more than 2K18, I would say, at the end of the day, when I got into the Ultimate Team with my 90s All-Stars squad, makeshift 90s All-Stars squad that I had there. 2K18, I just couldn't... after a few months, just could not play anymore. You know why. We've discussed why. You were vindicated with your criticisms, just as I was vindicated with my NBA Playgrounds criticisms, just to toot our own horn there, toot toot. No, I actually did enjoy Live 18, despite my criticisms of some of the field. But I've said it before, and I hate to sound cliche, but with Live on that generation, and it's particularly Live 18 and 19, when something looks and feels good, it looks and feels really good. It's the clunky moments in between that were the problem, and that if you're not that. If you don't know how to make the game look good or how to best control the players in that game, it is very clunky, and that is a problem. But when you do get a highlight like that does look good, and it just flows really well, and the animations, all the animations have been selected perfectly, and the control, the input's just been perfect, it looks pretty damn good.
And Railhouse, the gentleman who has been sending in those highlights for the top 10 or just posting them on his Twitter, he spends a lot of time on NBA Live 18 and NBA Live 19 because that's pretty much all what his highlights are. And he just knows how to use the sticks. Like, he's really good on the sticks. He can make really good highlight plays. He's been in the top 10 several times now with highlights from both of those games. And I applaud him for, sticking with it and sticking with the games that he's having fun with. I mean, if you think about it, NBA Live 18 and NBA Live 19, they're years old now. NBA Live 18 came out in 2017. So we're about 5 years. That's like 5 years old now. But he's sticking what he likes to play, and he's proud of it too. He's not ashamed of playing an older game. So good for you, Railhouse.
No, I agree 100%. To that point, how old do you think a game has to be before we can call it retro? Or does anything before the current year count as retro gaming?
That's a great question. We could center a whole show around that topic and even have people come in and talk about it as well.
We may have to circle back to it, yes. We may have to circle back to it.
Yeah, because, it's really interesting because a 24-year-old right now who, maybe he owns like NBA 2K22 or whatever. His first basketball game might have been when he was like, I don't know, 8 to 10 years old. And if you think about it, 14 to 16 years ago, what is that, 2K8?
Exactly, yeah.
So like 2K8, 2K6. So a young adult today can consider, 2K8 or 2K9 or 2K10.
Retro.
Even 2K11, they can consider that retro. But for you and I, we're like, how can you call NBA 2K11 retro? Right? Because we grew up with for us, like retro for us is NBA Live 95.
Yes.
Right? NBA Live 96. Or we could even consider maybe retro the original like NBA 2K. So the super early 2000s. But, even today, like think about it this way, which is crazy. An 18-year-old today, their first basketball game might have been like 2K14.
Yeah, that's an entry into basketball gaming.
Right, exactly. So I think it's a good discussion to have. What you would consider retro or not, but I think that it often depends on the person's age that's discussing it and what their first experiences were with basketball games.
Now, that's a great point, and we should circle back to do a full discussion once we've canvassed our listeners for their opinions, because there are varying opinions on it. I mean, some people feel that retro gaming can only refer to a specific era. For example, Atari or the first Nintendo console, the Nintendo Entertainment System, maybe Super Nintendo at the latest, or perhaps the first, the early 3D era, so PlayStation, etc., the first PlayStation. whereas others see it as, well, once it gets past a certain point, that everything becomes retro at a certain point, but is there a cutoff 15 years, 20 years, 10 years, 5 years? So I think it's an interesting topic. So we should definitely throw that out there to the listeners and come back to that on a future show. My other question this week, I saw, and shout out to NBA Cobwebs on Twitter, a fantastic account to follow if you love NBA history. It's just some of the obscure stuff that account posts, as well as well-known stuff as well. But I didn't know, actually, that at one point there was a rumor, or very strong possibility, of Julius Erving joining the Jazz for a couple of years there at the end of his career, but eventually re-signed for a year with the 76ers and finished his career there in 86-87. But it got me thinking, because one of the modding projects that I've always wanted to try, and it comes down to having the game and the resources and the time to make the mod, of course, is a proper what-if roster with teams of what could have happened, like the 2001 Magic, with if they'd been able to get Grant Hill, Tim Duncan, and Tracy McGrady, the three of them together, and something like that with Julius Erving on the same team as Karl Malone and John Stockton, a young Stockton and Malone, would have been a tremendous what-if. What are some of the what-if teams that you like to see in a what-if roster, Derek?
Well, I want to first off say that, the Jazz were incredibly close to beating the Lakers without a Julius Erving, right? I think it was 1988, the 87-88 season and the 88 playoffs, where they took the Lakers to 7 games. And they should have had that series. So does Julius Erving, even in his older age, would he been able to put the Utah Jazz over the top? Very possible, because they had such a strong team already. So that's one of the biggest what ifs. I also want to point out that Julius Erving aged gracefully in the NBA. And if you look at his numbers, he was still putting them up even in his last season. Right. So just like Clyde Drexler, Julius Erving on his way out probably still had a couple of years left in him. So it would have been interesting to see, how he performed with that Jazz team. I mean, that's tough. You talk about a what if roster. It depends on what you're talking about. If you're including, if a team drafted a player where they should have, like, for example, the pairing of Clyde Drexler and Michael Jordan. Right. Sure. That's a what if the Blazers had drafted Michael Jordan, what would have happened in that scenario? In my opinion, they would have been incredibly successful, both willing passers, both good passers. And I think that, just to show you that Clyde Drexler probably was going to be okay with being somewhat of a second fiddle, look how well he did with Akeem Olajuwon in 94-95, and how outstanding of a performer he was as a number 2 option next to Akeem in that championship run. So I think that egos would have been able to be put aside with those 2 players, and they would have performed beautifully together. I'd have to give more thought on what ifs, because a lot of them I think are draft scenarios, right? So, like, for example, what would have happened with Portland if instead of taking Greg Oden, they took Kevin Durant?
Sure.
Right? Their future could have looked entirely different because of that, that misstep that Portland made in taking Oden. So I would have to do a little bit more thinking on it. One of the what ifs, there's a couple what ifs related to players that came over too late to the NBA. For example, what if Arvydas Sabonis came over when he was young, when he wasn't hurt, when he was in his prime, or his young prime, and actually played with the Blazers with Clyde Drexler, right? With Jerome Kersey, with Terry Porter, etc. Would that have been enough to put him up over the top of the Pistons? Would that have been enough to maybe even take out the Bulls? Because they struggled often with teams that had a really good, dominant big guy. So would, Drexler, would he have gotten a championship before, his teaming up with Akeem with Houston? And then another one, which a lot of people don't talk about, is Dino Raja. So if Dino Raja had come over earlier for the Celtics and had been there in the early 90s in order to, help, not only older players that were on the team, but also just be able to help them win. And I think that would have made a big difference, because Dino Raja was incredibly athletic when he was younger in the early 90s and late 80s, and he could put up points in a hurry. He was a good rebounder, and I think he was active on defense. That could have changed, the success of the Boston Celtics and the moves they made around that team. So there's so many what ifs in NBA history that are fun to talk about, but those are some of my favorites.
And you bring up a great point there with the drafts being such a big part of the what ifs and possible free agent signings and trades. Those are the ones that I've looked into when I've been brainstorming possible ideas if I could get such a roster together. I mentioned the idea of Duncan going to the Magic in 2000, which was apparently very close to happening before Doc Rivers agreed to let him speak to Greg Popovich one more time before he signed him. And of course, who was the college coach that told Rivers, do you know, never let the recruit leave campus without being signed? Was it Calipari?
I actually don't know.
I'm not sure.
It might have been Calipari, but I'd have to look it up.
Might have been Calipari, but basically said, yeah, you've lost him. And they had, because he went back and spoke to Greg Popovich. And you think you're doing the right thing, but it's like letting the customer leave the shop without making the sale, quite frankly. So that's what happened with Duncan in 2000, apparently. And I think it worked out obviously worked out for the Spurs, Magic, and not so much. You've got the James Worthy for Charles Barkley trade in 1992. Before Chuck went to the Suns, the possibility of him going to the Lakers. He thought that was going to happen. He was very happy about that, and then that fell through. You've got
and Barkley was even in LA. That's the thing. He thought the trade went down. He traveled to Los Angeles, and he was ready to wear the purple and gold. And then at the last minute, it fell through. That's crazy. Yeah.
There's the possibility of the Knicks getting Isaiah Thomas in 1994 when they were trying to upgrade at point guard, and they offered Tony Campbell for Isaiah Thomas, and it was apparently pretty close, but Thomas had the choice and said, look, no, I'll finish my career in Detroit. The Knicks ended up trading for Derek Harper, go to the finals, a win away from the championship that year. So what happens if Isaiah Thomas is there in New York? Does that put them over the top? He was beaten up that year in his final year in the NBA, so maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. So you've got a lot of possibilities like that. MJ to the Clippers. If MJ stays on in 1994 and it doesn't retire that first time, the what ifs there. So there's a lot of things a lot of possibilities that you could do on top of the draft what ifs. Those trades that could have happened. One of the big what ifs. What if Kevin Garnett went to the Suns in 2007? He close to going to the Suns or the Lakers for that matter. That changes a lot of history. Do the Celtics get back on top? Possibly not. Does Paul Pierce stay in Boston? Possibly not. Does LeBron leave Cleveland if he can get over the hump the first time? Possibly not. So there's a lot of what-ifs there that would actually change the course of NBA history that I think would be very fun to play in a roster mod.
Len Bias is another one of the biggest what-ifs, because that completely changes the dynamic of the late 80s Celtics.
It does, yeah.
Right? I mean, that could have put, because he looked so good in college, and he was just going to be this superstar in the NBA, and he would have taken a huge load off of the aging Celtics. Bird with his bad back and aging, Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish getting up there in age, etc. Who knows how much success the Celtics could have had if Len Bias did live and played for them. It could have changed the entire Eastern Conference. Right. So, there's so many what ifs. I love some of the ones that you mentioned. The Barkley one is one of my favorites because he thought it was a done deal. And like you stated, he was excited about it.
Yeah.
And then it fell through. And so, I love it.
So that's something I'd love to revisit. I'd love to make that mod if we can get the resources together. Picking the right game where we have some resources to make that happen with the appropriate adjusted classic teams. And you've also got to then, whether you do an opponent for them, so they've got a year-specific opponent that is maybe also altered to reflect what if changes. So there's a lot of creativity that you can do with those roster mods, and I just love creative ideas for roster mods. I mean, current roster updates for old games are great. Full retro season rosters are great too, of course, and not disparaging those projects by any means. Olympic mods and college mods and everything else. But really getting creative with some what-if scenarios in a roster mod, I think would be really fun to play with.
Hey, if you like NBA 2K23 enough, maybe you would jump in and do a mod like that.
Retro players are there. I mean, they've got retro players that are already in the
right,
roster,
exactly.
So.
You could definitely work with it, especially on PC, where if you have a few missing faces, I could jump in there and try to make some for you, and then there'd be other people in the community that would probably try to do that as well. But hopefully you like the game.
Absolutely. And of course, we won't know anything more about 2K23 until August. They have put out the the plan for what they're going to reveal in August, the gameplay trailer. They're going to talk about my team and my NBA and my career. They have put that out there on the Twitter. But yeah, for the next couple of weeks, as usual, Derek, it's going to be no news. There's always that lull before the tip-off of the previous season, the cover reveal, the pre-order bonuses, the pre-orders, and then we actually learn about the game in August. So that will be coming. We will cover that at the time. But for the next couple of weeks, we will have no news, I imagine.
Yeah, that's the par for the course now, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we've been going through over the last few years now. And it's a little disappointing because they put out the prompt, hey, you guys can pre-order, and then they aren't showing real gameplay. They're not giving much information, and, they're just trying to get as many pre-orders as they possibly can. You know what I mean? Early on in the cycle. I feel like the gamers deserve a little bit more. I think that they need more information before they buy and everything. And I hope that people do wait. I hope they wait till they see gameplay. And I hope that they don't feel pressured to pre-order, because people, deserve to know what they're buying.
And I've said this before, and I might write an article about it as well, as a kind of a guide to pre-ordering. If you don't play my career or my team, and you're not a collector, you don't want the Jordan cover or whatever, go for the standard edition. You don't need that extra currency. If you're just going to be playing, if you're going to be modding on PC, if you're going to be playing my league or my NBA mostly, you don't need all that extra currency and the bonuses for my career and my team. So you can skip those more expensive versions. If you don't need any of that content, don't pay for it.
Right, unless you're a crazy collector like Andrew and I,
this is
where
true.
I almost pulled the trigger on a $50 Pau Gasol cover for NBA Inside Drive 2003. I haven't pulled the trigger yet, but I was like, how cool would it be to have, the Pierce cover and the Pau Gasol cover in my collection? So I know that you and I are in the minority as far as like our basketball video game collections and, how we handle these games and what we like to play. But yeah, I almost pulled the trigger on that Pau Gasol cover, and I still might.
I have talked myself out of a Raul Lopez Live 2004 cover simply because it was a bit too expensive for a game I already own. But just how rare that is, getting the Raul Lopez Spanish version of Live 2004. The Live 2001 with Sabonis on the cover, the aforementioned Davida Sabonis, is very rare. So if you come across that one, that is a true collector's item.
Yeah, but I bet it won't be $7,100 like Lakers versus
Celtics. Yeah.
Yeah, the factory sealed version, which we talked about on the last show. But sounds like we have a little bit of hope, and you have more hope now for NBA Live 24, especially with some recent developments, which we talked about on the last show. Of course, there's been no formal announcement, but you definitely seem more hopeful.
Well, we're always looking for those little bits and pieces that may hint at a bright future for NBA Live, and as we've said so many times before, we want that competition. I mean, look what Inside Drive did back in the day. Look what 2K did with NBA Live, and just what we've lost by not having that. So a comeback for NBA Live is something that we still very much want to see.
No, 100%. Competition in the space breeds excellence, and it also gives people more options, which they deserve.
Before we go on, a reminder that the NLSC podcast comes out every week on the NLSC, NBA-live.com, as well as our YouTube channel. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast apps. If you're listening on any of those apps, we'd greatly appreciate a review. To keep up with the show and everything we're doing with basketball gaming in general, connect with us on social media. On Twitter and Facebook, we are the NLSC. We also have an Instagram, NLSC Basketball, and on YouTube, we're youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. Once again, visit us at nba-live.com, where in addition to the podcast, you'll also find all of our original content, as well as our forum and modding community. And thank you, Past Me, for that very professional promo. Speaking of reviews, I got some very nice ones from friends of the show, B-Ball Video Games, Nate Stasho, King J Mace. Some very kind reviews on Apple Podcasts there. Shout out to you, very much appreciated. And shout out to Nate, who wanted to make sure that everybody knows on the Apple Podcast review page that he is the top-ranked NBA Live 2001 player in the world. Yes, I got a kick out of that. So thank you for the reviews and also for the... well-deserved bragging, because yes, you probably are the top-ranked 2001 player in the world.
Yeah, I really want to thank all of you who went on Apple Podcasts and gave those reviews. I did put out a prompt on Twitter saying, if you have something to say about the show and you want to rate the show, please go on to Apple Podcasts. And those listeners jumped on the opportunity, and they so many kind words in those reviews. And I just want to thank all of our listeners for, tuning in every week, for supporting the show, supporting the top 10, supporting Andrew's articles, our gameplay videos, and, just loving what being part of what the NLSC is all about. You guys motivate us to release a show every single week. I can promise you that. Andrew and I talk about that off air, and we want to put out a great show for you every single week, and we want you to enjoy our content. So thank you so much. And this isn't going to be stopping anytime soon. Andrew and I love what we do, and it's going to continue.
Well said. Always blown away by the support. A podcast about basketball video games. When we started it, we wondered, is there going to be a listener base for this? Are people going to listen to people talking about basketball video games? But yes, they do, and we very much appreciate it. We love that more and more of you are tuning in and also responding to the show with your comments and leaving these kind reviews and, of course, comments on the articles or responses on social media. We're glad that our content is resonating with you so much.
And also, Andrew, you and I have recorded over 130 episodes together now. And I want to thank you on air for, being, consistent and, willing to get on here every week with me to do a show. And, it's always a pleasure talking to you about basketball video games. And I love that, I found somebody in this world that is crazy enough to collect like we do and like yes. I do, etc. But also somebody that just has this ridiculous passion for basketball video games. So it's been really nice to, jump on this podcast every single week with you and do all of the content that we do. But probably the coolest part is honestly the fact that I gained a good friend out of it. So definitely good stuff.
Oh, right back at you, mate. Absolutely. It's great to have somebody who can join me on this on the site and produce this content and be passionate, as you say, about games. I do think we make a dynamic duo, better than Orange Juice, almost as good as me and Terry Hansen. Who, by the way, I had a closer look after I noticed in the replay, has a Bulls tattoo on his arm. I didn't notice this for a whole season, but he's got a Bulls tattoo on his arm. So that's a sign. We're probably going to go to the Bulls together after this season, maybe.
I was going to say, you would talk to me actually off air, and you were like, I don't know if I could leave Philadelphia as long as Terry Hansen is still here. But
it's a sign.
In the back of my mind, I was like, well, if Terry Hansen decided to go to the Chicago Bulls, or he got traded to the Chicago Bulls, I feel like Andrew would find his way out.
Oh, I'm going.
Of Philadelphia, and he would, yeah, exactly. And he would join Chicago, and he'd start a dynasty over there.
I'm going for that trophy. I want the I've had it. I want out trophy by demanding a trade. Yes, I'm going for that trophy then and go to the Bulls, 100%. But no, appreciate you being my co-host on the podcast and creating all this content. Plenty more to come. And once again, thank you to our listeners. And thank you for all the responses, of course, which have turned this week's mailbag into a full-blown discussion topic about the return of NBA Live, the possible return of NBA Live, the possible release of NBA Live 24. That's what we want to see. And you put out the question there, Derek, what would it take for people to switch or to spend more time if they get both games?
And these are conversations that are happening at EA, right?
Sure.
That they're having meetings about this. They're maybe in person in a round table, or maybe they're on a Discord chat, or maybe they're on a virtual Teams meeting or Skype meeting or Zoom meeting or something like that. And they're saying, what can we do to make our game stand out and get people to purchase our game as opposed to NBA 2K, or what will drive people to get both? Like, basically, what is going to get people to look at our game and want to buy it and stick with it and spend more time with it, etc.
And it's an important question too, because Live has released in the past 10 years, not consistently, of course. So that question of how they can get that market share back and get attention on their game, it's a pertinent question.
No, 100%. And I want to make a very, very important point. A lot of people are struggling money-wise, right?
Sure.
And even people that aren't struggling money wise, a lot of people are cautious about how they spend their money. A lot of people are only going to choose one game. Because if you think about it, if they're getting the next gen version and then EA Sports followed suit, you're looking at, even if you just want the standard edition, you're looking at $70 for like NBA 2K, right? $70 then for NBA Live 24 if it were to release. I don't think there's a lot of people out there that are going to want to double dip and spend $140 minimum. That's just on the base game to get 2 games. So, if you think big picture, I love the big picture, Andrew.
Of course.
I think that a lot of kids who maybe are on an allowance or are maybe, their parents are going to get them something for a gift or anything like that, they're going to be looking at getting only one of the games. And that's a big part of the demographic, right? Teenagers, correct? A lot of kids that aren't making their own money, or they are making money but not much. So these conversations are being had behind the scenes. So that was the purpose of the question. It's saying, what would make you either switch or be enticed enough to get both? And I just love the amount of responses that we got and how detailed everybody was, right? Most people were pretty detailed in their response.
And it also demonstrates that there are things that NBA Live could do to win back the crowd and to get people checking it out, or either choosing it over NBA 2K, or if they get both games, to end up spending more time with it. And to your point, people may have a budget of a couple $100 a year for games, but those are 2 games that are coming out at the same time. I mean, it's one thing to have, okay, my gaming budget is, say, $200, $250 or whatever, and sprinkle that over the course of a year, a couple of new releases, some Steam sales or whatever, and just sprinkle that across the course of 12 months. But to put out that $140, as you say, at the same time, for two games that you'd want to play at the same time because they're coming out for the new NBA season, to then make the choice between the two, that's why it's a competition.
Yeah, exactly. And I also want to make a point about the way I worded the question. And I said, switch. I already mentioned the money portion of it. But if this was, say, the early 2000s, and let's say it was NBA Live 2004 coming out, right, against the newest NBA 2K. Well, back then, NBA Live was dominating, right? They had the biggest portion of the market share. I would just be wording the question the same, but for 2K. I would say, when ESPN NBA Basketball, which is what it ended up being for 2K5, when ESPN NBA Basketball releases, what would make you make the switch from NBA Live 2005 to ESPN NBA 2K5? So it's no secret that NBA EA Sports needs to win a lot of people over, and it's also no secret, in today's day. And it's also no secret that there's a lot of people out there that are not going to want to double dip.
We look at the reasons why people have switched in the past. No longer coming out on PC. Fatigue with the game. Not happy with the direction. Wanting a change of pace. And the other game providing a viable alternative. Or for a console exclusive, for example, coming out on the console of your choice, NBA Inside Drive, as we mentioned. So there's a lot of reasons that people have switched over the years and switched back and forth. And of course, you've mentioned issues before. Your issues with NBA Live when it didn't support multiplayer in the franchise modes and controlling multi-team control in the franchise modes. So there's a lot of reasons that you will check out the other game. And, this is actually catering to my interests. This is coming out on the platform of my choice. So there's a lot of reasons to switch, and it's not about not being anti-2K or anything like that. It's simply we would like to have the choice, and it's interesting to see what would make people make that switch, because Live's reputation is not at its highest, shall we say. We would like it to be much better ourselves, and we've been very open about our criticisms of the series over the past generation plus. So it is interesting to see why people would make that switch, and that's why we threw out the question to the community and got a lot of great responses, as you said. What would be your baseline, Derek?
Somebody asked me that, actually, and my response was that the game needs to be fun. You need to be able to it needs to be pick up and play. You need to have control over the action, so not as many canned animations. It needs to, have less canned animations and more proper flow. It needs to be customizable in order to, do stuff with rosters, etc. It has to have a proper create a player feature, all of that stuff. It doesn't have to have that for me to pick up and have fun with the game, but it certainly helps me spend more time with the game. Right. It needs to have, the basics of what a modern sports game should have, as far as depth goes and customization goes and everything. And it would definitely go a long way if they did go, release on PC, because I find it easier to, boot up the PC games. I find that the performance is often better on PC than it is on console. I can do different things with it, and it opens up the world of modding, which, if I like the game, I'll spend thousands of hours modding it.
For sure, yeah.
Etc. Right. But I think just the most important thing that would make me spend more time on live than, say, the most recent 2K is that the game needs to be fun, fast, free-flowing, and you have to have control over the action. It needs to be really fun to get on the sticks, needs to be pick up and play. And I just want to have a blast with it. I want to be able to get lost in it. So everything I mentioned basically would get me hooked.
No, I think that's a great baseline for the expectations, because it needs to at least have the staples, right? Of a game that's came out. It needs to have the staples of a game that came out in the mid-2000s, which is something that was missing from the last few NBA Lives, that they were missing things that were there in much earlier iterations.
Right, 100%. And I said this too, and we're going to get to the responses shortly, but I think they can compete right out of the gate if they give you that base depth and they give you that customization, and the game is just flat out fun, and it looks fun when it's previewed and showed off, right? When they show those gameplay trailers, when they show the actual gameplay videos, when you see those videos go up on YouTube or they're sharing clips on Twitter or IG or something like that, like, the game needs to look fun and it needs to be fun. And I think that, I think live could compete right out of the gate, because there is a lot of 2K fatigue out there. If they give people that great show pre-release and it looks like something that people are going to want to play and they market it appropriately, I think that there are a lot of people that would either double dip or make the switch to NBA Live.
How many times have we said it? It needs to impress immediately. It can't be I'll wait and see, or it's better than it looks. It needs to impress. And yes, sometimes games are better than they look. We know that we can attest to that, especially with some of our old favorites that haven't that aged as well graphically as others, but are still a blast to play. But a new game for the current generation, or next gen, or whatever you want to call it, PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X, and hopefully a PC port, as you say, it needs to impress. It needs to look modern.
Oh, no, 100%. So what about you? What would make you spend more time on NBA Live than the most recent 2K?
So I was thinking about it when you put the question out there and see if I could get some specifics. And yes, it needs to have those basics. As you said, it needs to have those staples that we expect of a basketball video game in the year 2022 and beyond. But as a baseline, it needs to have a dynasty or franchise mode as deep as NBA Live 06 PC. It needs to have gameplay that's at least as fun as NBA Live 10. It needs an ultimate team that is at least as deep as NBA Live 18. It took a step backwards in NBA Live 19, unfortunately. Graphically, I think it needs to at least be 2K14 for PS4, to borrow from another series. It needs to be at least that good and impressive. And if it's that good and impressive, it will impress. It also needs to have roster editing that's at least as deep as, I'd say, Live 10 or even Live 06 PC. That took a step backwards. It took ages to get into it took almost the whole generation to get into Live when they finally brought it back with the patch, the post-release patch in Live 18. Then it took a step back in Live 19 for who knows why. It needs to have a career mode. Look, I'll take Live 19's career mode. I think there's enough depth there and the variety, and it's different from 2K's My Career as far as how it's more traditional and how it has the streets and the league and the streets. I think is a good approach to that, an alternative to what 2K is doing. It needs to have a standalone playoffs mode, which they did have in Live 10 and hasn't come back since, but again was a staple of much earlier games as well. I think that's pretty much my baseline.
Give people a reason to put on the game.
Yes.
Whether it be customization options, whether it be, like you stated, a deep dynasty, mode, whether it be multi-team use in Dynasty, whether it be, an offline mode that NBA 2K doesn't have that people can sink their teeth into. And obviously the end user needs to want to put it on so they can enjoy the on-court action, right? So it needs to feel right. But give them a reason to turn on the game, give them a reason to be excited. And I think a lot of that comes down to not only the development, but the way they promote the game, right? The marketing, which has been, I think, weak overall on the PS4 gen versions of NBA Live. Market the hell out of your game. Get NBA Live in people's heads. Show off the good aspects of the game. Get people pumped about it. So I really hope that if they do come back for NBA Live 24, or even in the future, hopefully NBA Live 24, but even if they came up past that, that the marketing team does the appropriate work to, promote the game.
I was writing a Way Back Wednesday, and in doing so, I was trying to find an old commercial that actually inspired me to get Live 96 PC back in the day. It was the EA Sports Countdown. They presented it like a top 5 or a top 10, but it was basically just promoting the EA Sports lineup that year. But it was a really cool commercial. I couldn't find it on YouTube. I found another Live 96 commercial on YouTube, and it was so awesome, those ads that they used to do back in the day. And 2K has done a lot of those ads as well that really get you pumped up to play and excited about the product. That certainly in the early 2010s when the product was really cooking, right? When we didn't have that 2K fatigue and when it was definitely at its height or reaching new heights every single year, or so it felt, that those commercials, they really did hype you up. I mean, we've mentioned it so many times before, and I've done a Way Back Wednesday on it as well, because it is such an iconic promotion. But the OMG trailer for 2K14.
No, 100%. I also think that NBA 2K does a great job, even, for better or for worse, because we know that not all influencers are great. We know that some of the influencers promote some stuff that we don't agree with, but they've done a really good job of getting their influencers promoting the game, right? I mean, NBA 2K has people with hundreds of thousands of subscribers on YouTube and sometimes hundreds of thousands of followers on Twitter promoting their game during the entire run of that game cycle. And, they get people talking about the game. They get people, 2K in people's heads. They get my team in people's heads, my career, the city, all of that stuff. And we all know that, influencers are not all great. And we don't agree with some of the selections that they make as far as people that, do promote the game and, how they promote it. But they have done a really good job of putting that promotion on those influencers with those high follower accounts, as opposed to making like their standard marketing team do all the work.
And since it is a topic that's been put out there, floated, and even I wrote an article about it as well, what of the idea of coming back with a college basketball game first to test the waters and then expanding back into the NBA? Or do you just dive right back in with the NBA?
Well, Brent Lane, actually, to give away one of the responses, and I might as well get that out of the way now. Brent Lane on Discord stated, no NBA, like forget about the NBA, create a college basketball game. And I mentioned this on one of the recent episodes that if they were to come back, and they were able to, create a strong gameplay base with a college basketball game, and that was well received, that could be their base for the NBA game. Like we know that NBA Live 10 was strong gameplay wise, right? But so was NCAA Basketball 10.
Exactly.
Why? Because they're using the same engine. So I think that that's definitely a possibility if they came back with a college game first. And then they, tested the waters with that. Did people enjoy the gameplay? And then maybe they could identify some improvements before they release the next NBA Live, and then they run with that. Of course, that's a possibility. But for me, maybe I'm selfish. I think that the longer they wait, the more problematic things could get. And I think that it's smart for them to release a college basketball game and an NBA game. That would separate them from 2K Sports because they'd be the only ones making a college basketball game and releasing an NBA game as well. But it's also a perfect time for them to jump back into the space because, as we've talked about, there is a lot of 2K fatigue out there.
No, I absolutely agree. And I'll also put my hand up here and say that selfishly, I prefer an NBA game because I prefer the NBA. over, even though I have my quibbles with the modern NBA, I still prefer it over college basketball. So I'd be more interested in the NBA, an NBA licensed game. I think they would also sell more as well. I mean, there's certainly a huge following of college basketball, don't get me wrong. And if they can make a college basketball game an international release this time, without having to import from the States, of course, now with modern consoles being region-free, that's less of an issue. But if they can have that international release right out of the gate, then that certainly makes it as viable, or potentially as viable, as an NBA title, especially because it would be an alternative to 2K's NBA-only title, where a college basketball title would be something different. But I would prefer, all things considered, another NBA game in the space.
No, 100%. I think that the NBA is where it's at, right? That's what these kids love. That's what they want to talk about. That's the athletes that they mostly look up to. That's their role models in a lot of cases. So I think that the NBA is where it's at.
So that's pretty much our baseline for making the switch or spending more time with Live, or equal time with NBA Live, as the case may be. But let's get to the listener responses now, starting out with Knowledge Bone at the Harassment on Twitter. Live should be just a little more arcade, fast-paced, highlight/trick plays, and exciting. Even make the graphics a little more arcade style. Bring back signature moves in some capacity. Not saying NBA Jam, just more loose than 2K. And I mean, that would make it a very different alternative to 2K for sure. I think I'd prefer something more that's still along the lines of 2K. You do some things differently, and you maybe go for that loose style, absolutely. Looser than what Live was on that past generation. But, I mean, I have very specific thoughts. When I hear the word arcade, I always think NBA Jam, Playgrounds, Street, etc. I think maybe that whether you want to call it a casual approach to the sim style, or an exaggerated approach to the sim style, or whatever, I think that is something that people need. Now, I also think you need the settings and the sliders, Derek, to make sure that everybody can get the experience that they want out of any game, out of Live or 2K.
I see where he's coming from, but I think when he's saying arcade, he's not obviously talking about, free rides to the hoop, right? Sure. He's not talking about like free rides to the hoop. He's not talking about constant flashy dunks, all of that stuff. He wants a fun, fast-paced basketball game that also has the appropriate sim elements, right? So I think what he's actually asking for is more what real basketball is and what it should be. So not arcade, what real basketball is, right? Basketball is a beautiful sport. We've talked about this before. It's fun, it's exciting, and it's explosive with like all the explosive athletes that play in it as well. It's not standing. I don't know where somebody got the idea that sim was standing up at the top of the key, running a play, watching players run around, hitting them off a screen, then going to the second option and everything. That doesn't mean that a game is sim. In fact, when you think about real basketball, like I said, you think of fun, fast-paced, get out and run, explosive athletes, and, back in the day, physical. Not as much so today. But it's like getting a board, being able to, feel good about getting that board off the glass, quick outlet, being able to run the floor, and you have your AI teammates running the floor with you, and maybe you do a give and go, or you make your defender to commit, you drop off a pass, and then you throw it down, and it just all feels organic, fun. It's just a blast. So I think what he's more getting at is he wants to have more control over the action, which all of us do. He wants the game to be fun, like real basketball is. Real basketball is an absolute blast. And he wants it to flow well. It wants to have great pace. We talked about inside drive earlier, right? Great pace. So that's the way I look at what he said. I don't think he means arcade in the sense of he wants it to be like a free-for-all and a dunk fest, right? I think he just wants more real fun basketball feel.
Now that is a great point, and that is something that Live needs to do. I mean, you look at the mid 2000s when they were definitely trying to go for sim, but were perhaps a bit too slow paced, especially 07 and 08, with the default sliders at least were very very plodding. And yes, the NBA had slowed pace during that era, but the players were also moving in slow motion. You had to pretty much hold down sprint all the time just to get them to move at a pace that didn't feel like crawling.
Right, 100%. That's what I said that to somebody else too. They were like, there's this there's this thing where people think that live has always been arcade, or they've always tried to make more arcade basketball games. That is definitely not the case. And if you look back at games like Live 07 and Live 08, they were trying to slow things down quite a bit. They were trying too hard to make the game slower in order to attempt a sim style. But in reality, that's not the way basketball should be played. It's not the way it is played. And that's not a fun brand of basketball either. And I think that's part of the reason why those games didn't do that well. Because they weren't super fun to pick up and play. They weren't a realistic basketball pace. Another thing that I want to say, too, is a player like him, he doesn't want to be frustrated with the gameplay. Like, he doesn't want to be dragged into his defender constantly, right? Like, he doesn't want to be put into all of these two-man canned animations that interrupt the flow. He wants free-flowing basketball, and he wants control over the action. And I think that NBA 2K oftentimes misses that mark with their new releases, because there is so much side to side, like two-canned animations. There's so much there's a lot of lack of control oftentimes in the post. Oftentimes you're bouncing off of the air when you're trying to do something, right? Like, you'll try to do a drop step and your defender's hands aren't even on you, but you're being pushed back by this invisible force, etc. That's the stuff that's not realistic, people. That's not sim. Like, there's nothing sim about those features of the newest NBA 2K games. So basically, what I think a lot of these people want, the ones that they say they want arcade, is they don't want those frustrations. They don't want those unrealistic elements. They want to be able to get out there and play basketball and have fun with it.
Next up, we have at Dives 2K, modern in the community, of course. For a moment, the gameplay seemed better than 2K. You just have to go out on PC to change from 2K. And of course, there are a lot of people, especially in our community, that play on PC exclusively, and that's the release that they want. And if a game doesn't come out on PC, they're not going to get a console to get it. They're just not going to worry about it. They're not going to be interested in it at all. So getting it on PC, and certainly if it is a port from the current generation, next gen, PS5, X, Series X, etc., then yes, that would be a way to get not a huge portion of gamers, and this is something we talked about on the last show as well when we're talking about the 2K23 PC news, that it is a much smaller demographic, PC basketball gamers. Nevertheless, it is a very loyal and passionate group of gamers. So if NBA Live comes back and is that current gen, the latest gen port on PC, then yes, it's going to win some people over probably.
Yeah, I want to touch on what he said first. He talked about, at times NBA Live 19 looked better than NBA 2K. So like NBA 2K19 and maybe even the newer versions. And I can see where he's coming from animation-wise with certain aspects of it. I think I brought up in the comments, even something as simple as the way the player dribbles up the floor. That often, when he's bringing up the ball, that often does look better on NBA Live 19, and those animations do look more fluid and more realistic than what they'd look like on the newer NBA 2Ks. And, some of the highlights that Relhouse has been, showing, and, he's been in the top 10 with NBA Live 19 multiple times, etc. Sometimes things string together beautifully on NBA Live 19. I think that what ended up happening was the game was really fun on the demo, but overall the gameplay got hurt in a big way by patches. And we've talked about that on the NLSC podcast before, as they made it kind of sluggish. It seemed almost like they added more two-canned animations. As a result, shooting went way out of whack after patches, etc. So I have trouble picking it up now because I don't have that much fun with it. The second part of what he said, releasing on PC isn't just about how many buyers they get, right, for the PC version. And it's about how the PC modding community and the PC population in general that do buy it, how they can promote the game, how they can promote NBA Live, and how they can put that brand in people's heads. I've talked about it before, Dom2K, Dominus, etc. There's 2K YouTubers who spend the majority or all of their time on the PC version, and they're uploading videos of mods, whether it be cartoon characters, scoreboard mods, graphic mods, all of this stuff. And they're uploading these videos, and they're getting hundreds of thousands of views and millions of views over time. That is huge promotion. That is huge promotion for NBA 2K. And it would be the same for NBA Live. There's a guy named BJeff, who I know King J Mace knows. He uploads videos of modded gameplay of, say, like NBA 2K22 and whatnot, with graphics mods, roster mods, and everything. I just looked at one of his videos for that. 890,000 views on that one video. How many impressions did that get? How many of those people, had NBA 2K in their head at that time watching that video? Every single one of them, right? So people like Diabetes 2K, if he got his hands on the newest NBA Live and he started making YouTube videos and then other modders started making them, even if people weren't going out and buying the PC version as a result, it gets NBA Live in people's heads. It's amazing for marketing the game, and it gets people talking about it, and it gets people buying the console versions too.
And you bring up another great point there, patches, because we saw how Live 18 and 19 were affected, especially Live 19 was affected by patches. But 2K has been affected by patches as well. I was on Reddit last night and looking at some of the comments on the 2K subreddit, and people mentioning how there's some. I think it's the 2K Intel account mentioned there's going to be some improvements to, or 2K leaks. I forget which one. I think it's 2K Intel were mentioning the possible improvements to defense, and people were saying, "Well, we've heard this before," and other people pointed out correctly that we have seen some improvements at launch, but then give it 2 or 3 weeks, people, especially online gamers, and it sounds a little bit elitist of me to say, but it does often come from the online competitive scene, complaining about this is too hard, we're not hitting enough shots or whatever, and so the defense gets nerfed. Now, sometimes that's a good thing to nerf some of the defense. It was too easy to strip ball handlers at launch last year, and they did clean that up with patches, but other times they've just nerfed the defense just to overpower the offense again, because that's what they want to do online. They want to shoot 10 or 15 threes and 5-minute quarters. That is a problem. So a big issue with 2K, and another way that NBA Live could get people to switch from 2K back to Live, is having a consistent vision and presenting that consistent experience that is great out of the box. Maybe you do need to adjust it a little bit, because once something gets out in the wild, you just start finding things that you maybe not account for through testing or whatever, whether they be bugs or gameplay balance. You certainly do have to take that feedback into consideration, but have that consistency and stick to your principles and your vision for the game. And look, how many times in the online scene do people say, get good, adjust? Well, those are those same people that are begging the developers to make those nerfs and those boosts, those buffs, to make the game not what it was supposed to be at launch, and ruining the game in many cases. So throw that back to those cheeses and say, no, you get good, you adjust, because this is the basketball gaming experience that we want to present. And yes, you do take that feedback into account, but don't be chopping and changing constantly with patches. Stick to that vision, be consistent, and I think people will switch and say, hey, 2K is just, it launches great, but then it's terrible after 2 or 3 weeks, or it's not the game that we wanted after a couple of patches. Live is having this consistent experience that is good. I'm going to switch to Live, and I'm going to stick with Live. So I think that's something else. Don't over-patch, don't over-adjust your game after launch.
You know what games were absolutely great gameplay-wise at launch, and as a result, they are still talked about fondly today? NBA 2K14 for Xbox One and NBA 2K17. I saw a thread that and they didn't go through any damaging patches. I think NBA 2K17 went through a couple that made it a little bit more sluggish than I like, but I can still really enjoy the game. I saw a thread from a high follower account on Twitter. I want to even say that it was a blue check mark, but I don't remember. But this thread had hundreds of comments underneath it, and it was saying, what are your top 5 NBA 2Ks of all time? And NBA 2K17 was the person who did the original post. It was their top game. And then a ton of people in the comments were saying NBA 2K17 was either their favorite of all time or top 3. And NBA 2K14 also was right up there. Why? People loved it from the get-go, right? And they enjoyed the game gameplay-wise throughout the game cycle. And because the game was good from the get-go and it just had strong gameplay, a lot of people can go back and play those games now and still get enjoyment out of them, right? They age incredibly well. So 2K17 and 2K14 are examples of games that were really strong out of the gate and are still being talked about fondly now.
Definitely. And NBA 2K17 is one of those weirdly maligned games where people said, oh, everybody hated it when it came out and they loved it in retrospect, and that's why everybody hates on the newest game. No, 2K17 was very well received at the time. We absolutely hold the 2K series to a high standard because it has achieved a high standard, so you want to maintain that or go even higher. But 2K17 was very well received when it was released, so that's the revisionist history is that it wasn't, not that people hated it and now love it.
No, 100%. I mean, if you go back and look at early gameplay videos, which are still up on YouTube of NBA 2K17 from the preview season and then after it was first released, go into those comment sections and look how positive everybody is about that game, about how great it looks, how they just got their hands on it, if it had already been released, and how much fun they were having on it. Same thing on Operation Sports. If you go look at those old threads or on the NLSC, etc. So yeah, I mean, NBA 2K17 was a very popular release, easy to go back and pick up and play because it was very well made overall, and it was the last game on that old motion system before they switched it over to 2K18. But yeah, 2K17, 2K14, a lot of people talk fondly about those two games today.
Next up, we have my old friend Mario, who I've been to a few NBA Live community events with over the years, at Clubminati017 on Twitter. Dumbed down on being arcade-like. Mike Wong wanted the direction to go simulated. Go simulated. You have the supportive engine, but never used it as an advantage. You want Park to be fun, then make NBA Street or NBA Jam right there with the arcade core. Most importantly, address issues per blog and vlog, and listen to the people of the community regarding their needs and wants. Focus on the fundamentals on both sides of the ball. And yeah, I mean, Mario and I, as I said, we've known each other for many years, very similar takes on NBA Live and what it needed to be, so I'm definitely with him on that one. Again, it's the don't go in that arcade direction. I mean, the only game that has really leaned in that direction is Live 2003, but don't go down that road of making it what is truly arcade-like, but definitely have that loose fun. Have that AI, have that realistic gameplay, have the CPU, having freelance offense, running plays, being strategic for sure, and encourage that strategic play and picking your spots. And it doesn't have to be the realistic amount of dunks, and yes, you can fudge shooting percentages and so forth. And always, that's what sliders are for. If you want that ultra realistic experience, that's where you tweak the sliders to really get the results you want. But have that sim core of the gameplay is what Live needs to be, because otherwise people who want to make that switch from 2K are going to play that, and they do make that mistake, Derek, of saying, oh, this is arcade-like, and maybe that's not a great description of it. Maybe that's not the right genre as we see it, but it definitely needs to be sim at its core.
I think they tried too hard to make it sim on the 5-on-5 gameplay on NBA Live 19, to be honest with you, because that game crawls. Okay, and again, sim is not crawling basketball, right? It's not sluggish. That's not basketball. That's not fun basketball, and that's not realistic basketball. And honestly, what do you call sim now? If you call sim taking 83s a game and going from three-point line to three-point line, that's technically what the NBA is doing right now, right?
True.
And so let's back it up just a little bit here, and let's try to it depends on what you define as sim. Because if we're going by what the NBA is now, it's either a layup for a three most of the time, and it's three-point line to three-point line, chucking and shooting about 34%. The bottom line is the game needs to be fun, and you need to have control over the action. And I don't find that NBA 2K22, you have enough control over the action. There's too many canned moments. There's too many frustrations and everything. And I wouldn't call, and I've said this so many times before, Andrew, and you know this, I wouldn't call NBA 2K a great sim. I think that it's missing a lot of sim real basketball elements related to control to be called a great sim. So I think of basketball a different way. I think of it, like I stated, I'll say again, I know if I sound like a broken record here, but it's fun, fast, and free-flowing. It's a great sport. It's beautiful. And I don't think that NBA 2K22 demonstrated that.
I mean, when I think of sim, I think of the strategy that reflects what the real teams are doing, for example, and players playing like their real life selves. And if you look at Live 19, yes, the pace is definitely a bit sluggish. I agree. But as far as the realism factor goes, you can really shut down Steph Curry playing against a CPU, Steph Curry, because he's not taking nearly as many threes as he does in real life.
Well, no, you want the players to play like they do in real life, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Like they miss the mark on that. And I've talked about this too. The authenticity is missing with NBA Live 19 from a player's perspective. Like I said, Siakam shouldn't feel like Kevin Durant on the floor. But in NBA Live 19, they feel awfully similar, don't they?
Yeah.
Because those players, there aren't any signature size-ups. There's not really any signatures outside of their shooting motions. And even a lot of those are not done well in NBA Live 19, etc. So, no, I completely agree on that fact. You know, if you want the players in the current NBA to be playing properly in the game, you better make sure that your tendencies are in good order. And you want to make sure that Steph Curry is shooting at least close to the number of threes that he would take in real life. And there needs to be more differentiation. But what I'm talking about is from a pure basketball standpoint. Right.
And pace
NBA Live.
Yeah.
And what's more important than pace? We talked about it earlier, right? The real pace of basketball. And part of the real pace of basketball is not having all of those annoying interruptions and frustrations that you get. All of those constant canned moments and everything. The game forcing you to slow up on the fast break, which happens constantly in NBA 2K22, where they do this intentional slow up with the dribble. I don't know if it's because they were trying to curve too many easy dunks or whatever, but allowing the defenders to catch up when in real life they wouldn't have been able to, right? So I think that it depends on how somebody defines sim, because there's a lot of moving parts to that.
I mean, I think it's all of it. I think it's not being able to just blow by defenders at will and just dunk easily. You need to, as real NBA players still do. I know that the physicality isn't there. The lane is more open than it used to be for a variety of reasons with the modern game. But you can't just waltz into the paint that easily and dunk every single time. So it's things like that there's a bit of a challenge, that there is that realistic strategy, that a strategic element to it, players playing properly, resembling their real life counterparts in the way that in their style and their abilities, and the feel, as you say, the feeling different and the play differentiation. But yes, you also need to have that pace, and sometimes it's easy to say, oh, well, if it's fast, it's arcade, but basketball is a fast sport, as you said. So no, I think it's a combination of all of those things, and he also brings up listening to the right voices, which is something that we believe in, and he's had a lot of experience with it, as I have, dealing with that. And he said, all my years seeing different community managers come and go, and even when I stepped away as their mod, seeing everything, especially when I returned after a break and returned as a mod, wish there was still solid communication that needs to be addressed. And it definitely does. I've talked about it on previous shows, how a lot of the old guard were given the cold shoulder by the most recent NBA Live community manager. Unfortunately, decided I'm just going to pick a few guys a few content creators to be the contact and the person to listen to and the person that I give content to, give exclusives to and whatever, and the rest of us were just unfollowed us on social media and just stop responding to our emails. The exact opposite of what a community manager should be. I'm just going to put it out there. Anyway, bitterness aside, Derek, I definitely agree with Mario on that one. He's been through that the same way I have, with different community managers being better than others, and some not delivering on promises as far as interviews and content and whatnot, and then they leave you holding the bag. Yes, a little bit of bitterness there as well. That communication is just so important for marketing.
Yeah, I want to make a point really quick before I get to that, because obviously that's important. When I'm saying free-flowing, fun basketball and everything, I'm not saying that it's a free-for-all to the hoop. And I'm certainly not saying you don't run plays. What I'm saying is if you should have to use that strategy at times, and defense should be able to adjust, etc. But if you're standing there and running a play at the top of the screen, and your player that's running through the bottom, trying to come off a staggered screen or whatnot, and he's getting caught he's sliding all over the floor and he's getting caught up on other players and all of this stuff when he shouldn't be. And by the time he gets to his spot and catches the ball, the defense is right on him because of all the, ridiculous animations that played out as he was trying to get to his spot, which just happens a lot on NBA 2K and whatnot. That's not sim. What I mean is if you run a play and your player, is running through that staggered screen, that he can get to his spot the way he would in real life and catch and fire, right? Like the defender gets caught on that staggered screen. So it's, and, the same thing, with the overall feel of the game. If you're a defender on NBA 2K22, and this happens because you've played it before, and I've seen it on other people's videos and videos that I've actually shared with you as well. If your defenders are so confused constantly like they are on NBA 2K, and they don't know who to guard, they don't know how to defend a pick and roll, all of this stuff, and they're just moving out of your way and everything, at what point did that become sim? How did that become the sim standard, right? Yeah. Like stuff like that. So, like, again, it depends on what you define as sim. I think that basketball is fun, free flowing. It is beautiful, and you should be able to run plays and feel good about that, etc.
I will say that knowing Mario as I do think he'd agree with us on that point.
Oh, no, 100%. And I love his comment on this as well. And I'll get into this really quick. As far as influencers go, and as far as shutting out the old guard, that's the biggest mistake that they could possibly make, because some of the most passionate gamers, are people that have been around for a long time playing the games, right? And who have been in the community for a long time, and they have a lot of great ideas on how to improve the series. They know where the series been, where it's ended up, all of that stuff. Don't shut out the old guard. Don't make your choices based on people's age or based on people's following, all of that stuff. Get the right people, the right minds out there promoting the game and giving advice, or previewing the game, all of that stuff. Like, don't pick and choose based on somebody's follower account or subs, because just because somebody has a high following doesn't mean that they're going to help make your game better, and doesn't mean that they're going to promote the game the way that it should be promoted. And just because somebody's 20 years old, it doesn't mean that they're going to be above and beyond better promoting the game and connecting with people than somebody who's older than that.
And I'll put this out there just before we move on to the next response, but with the younger gamers, you absolutely want to listen to them because they're in the core demographic as well. But something that and this is old man grumbling, you may think, but something that you realize as you get a bit older is that when you look back when you were younger and see how myopic you were, how selfish you were about, what I think, what I want should be the way it should be, and what I'm interested in is what it's all about. And screw anybody else who doesn't play the right mode or whatever. And you get a bit older and you realize, no, we have to stand together on this, and we have to support each other and advocate for all modes, even ones that we're not interested in, because we should want everybody to have a great experience and the games to be well-rounded and deliver on all fronts.
Right, exactly. Think big picture. Think about your fellow gamer. Think about what their experience might be, what is going to be fun for them. Think about the depth of the game, and even if you don't play a certain mode, think about the population that might be interested in that mode, etc. So no, I definitely agree with that.
And at Tillhouse _ on Twitter, shout out to you, great content creator, the kind of content creator that Live should also be reaching out to as well. The narrative that Live should be arcade versus its own version of simulation is unfortunate to hear from the community. There truly is space for both games to be an example of simulation basketball, and with the tools I've seen Madden, NHL, and FIFA utilizing, the game would be solid. And yeah, that speaks to what we've been saying, is that it's that Live would be its own version of simulation, not arcade.
Right, and I love this comment. You're right. He's very good for the community, and he puts out a lot of great content. My response to him was this. I said, I agree with this 100%, and people that call Live arcade or say that the suits devs shoot for arcade don't know the series or the history of it very well. They shot for their own version of Sim in Live 19, 18, 16, 15, etc. Many act like every NBA Live game is Live 2003, which was very arcade pace-wise. And I said people need to realize that in basketball in real life, and I've said this many times here, is fun, fast, and filled with exciting moments. I said, as in get the board and run, acrobatic moves at the hoop, quick first steps, etc. They often call what is real basketball excitement arcade. So no, I appreciate his comment, and I think he's a really good influencer.
So next up, we have Fly Guy at Real Fly Guy GBG on Twitter. And this is something that the Live is going to face. Says, I think right now NBA Live is too far behind to ever be the Switch. But to be an alternative, it's definitely the case, but I don't think it's coming back. Now, you and I are a bit more optimistic than he is about that. I do understand the pessimism, because I've felt that more pessimistic in recent years as well, with the silence and whatnot. But that is a valid point, that it is going to be a very uphill battle for it to not just be an alternative. EA would probably want it to be, in fact, they would definitely want it to be, the company that is, want it to be a viable alternative to the point where it can win the battle, where it can win in sales, where it can be competition, not just an alternative, not just a little brother game, if you will. But that is a prospect that they may be facing, which is maybe why they're not coming back as quickly as possible, or as soon as they originally intended. But a lot of people, I think, will feel that way, that they've just been too burned by the NBA Live brand, and that they feel that it's too far behind, or that it's not going to be able to catch up or really satisfy them that 2K does, even with the 2K fatigue. So that is an uphill battle that NBA Live faces, and it is why, if it comes back as we're hoping it will, and seems to hint at every so often that it will, possibly as soon as next year, NBA Live 24, if it does need to impress.
I see what he's saying, but I completely 100% disagree. And here's why. So we're at the height of social media and the height of access at the moment. And as we know, NBA 2K has not received positive scores on Steam over the last few years since 2K18. They have not received positive scores on Metacritic. It's not like they've been great through this entire run. They make a lot of sales. That doesn't mean they're great. They've cornered the marketplace, right? They're the only basketball sim title that's being released. Of course, they're going to have a ton of sales. People love the NBA, right? And they want a basketball game to play with their friends. But this is the height of access, the height of social media. Things can happen really fast, promotion-wise, right? And if word gets out that NBA Live is doing, like NBA, let's say NBA Live 24 comes out, and word gets out that, hey, this is a really fun game. This is really fun. And the one is a great mode, and they brought back court battles, and it's a deeper game. It has customization, and, they see all the videos going up on YouTube, and those videos are getting hundreds of thousands of views. Things can happen fast. And those people who do have 2K fatigue, who have been giving those negative reviews, who have super gripes with the gambling mechanics and the stuff that's going on with NBA 2K over the last 4 or 5 years or so, a lot of those people could be like, all right, well, you know what? My friend picked this up. It's a great game. I got to pick it up too, right? Wait a minute. This looks better than NBA 2K. This looks more fun. I'm going with Live this year, etc. So I think it's crazy to think, it is my opinion, I think it's crazy to think that NBA 2K is some untouchable force that can't be toppled at any point in the future, when things can happen really fast in this height of social media, height of access space. And if NBA Live came out with a fun product, a more fair product, and people really were enjoying the game, I think that in the future, them or another company that, if they came into the space, could take over the bulk of the market share and become the dominant player. There's absolutely no way that NBA 2K is quote unquote untouchable.
It comes down to marketing, does it not? And that building that hype and impressing, which it absolutely needs to do. It needs to, as you say, put NBA Live in people's heads, get them talking about the game, get that word of mouth going, get that positive buzz about the game. He does mention that being an alternative might be the only thing Live can do at this point, unless 2K messes up severely. And while that may not be totally likely, I don't think it is completely unlikely, because you've seen how 2K has messed up, if not necessarily in the gameplay department or in its modes, certainly in fairness and its approach to recurrent revenue mechanics. And we saw the backlash when there was the charging for haircuts and some of the other things they've done in recent years that have really soured people on the brand. Where they say, hey, look, I like a lot of stuff about the gameplay, but I don't want to do the horrendous grinding, and I don't appreciate being pushed towards microtransactions. Now, EA as a company is certainly not averse to microtransactions. Live has avoided them out of necessity because it's a way of selling the game as, hey, we're not doing what 2K is doing. Now, if they're in the same position as 2K, they're probably putting microtransactions, and a lot of them, in the game. As it is, there's microtransactions in Ultimate Team. They're just not as pushy as my team or my career. But 2K can, from either a PR perspective, mess things up, or if they listen to the wrong people or take the game in a bad direction, they can at least get people so frustrated with the game as it is, even if it is still overall a solid product, so frustrated with it that Live can capitalize on that 2K fatigue and frustration and make a dent. Absolutely.
Oh no, they could absolutely make another big misstep, right? But I don't think that's even necessary in order for another player to come in and take a big chunk out of that marketplace and even become the dominant force in the future. People got to realize that you can't just go by sales numbers with this. Like, you can't just say, well, they have 10 million gamers buying every single year. There's only one option. Right? It's the same with Madden. You can't point to Madden sales and say this is a great football game just based off of their sales numbers, because they've cornered that marketplace. They're the only ones in it, right? So there's been many missteps already. There's a lot of people with ill feelings towards 2K out there, and it is very possible that a lot of people could make the switch. Now, NBA 2K has done a really good job of creating games that are deep, right? Like deep customization wise, deep mode wise. And they put a lot of effort, obviously, into my career, into my team, and promoting all of that stuff. So 2K isn't all bad. We know that. And you and I have spent a ton of time on NBA 2Ks, from the past and whatnot. And I said I got my money's worth on NBA 2K22 because of the way I play, etc. But again, to the idea that a 2K or any other company really is untouchable in 2022, 2023, 2024, with all of these different social media platforms, with all of these different opportunities for promotion, for all of the different opportunities for outreach, all of that stuff, for all the outlets that marketing teams do have and influencers do have, I don't think any company is untouchable.
Next up, we have Dr. Toboggan MD _ at MD Doctor on Twitter there. I still think last gen NBA Live 19 looks better than next gen 2K22 presentation, lighting, atmosphere. The one was by far the best park mode we've gotten in a b-ball game, but the 5-on-5 was horrendous. They'll need a fully new AI and actual basketball system. I'm rooting for them. And yeah, it does come down to having that solid 5-on-5 experience. There was too much focus on the one in Live 19, which did make it turn out to be a great alternative to the park and the career mode in my career in general in 2K, but with that hyper focus on the one, they did neglect the NBA side of things, and as I said, the 5-on-5 was just not where it needed to be.
No, I agree. I think that again, I'll say it again over and over and over again. The NBA is the draw, right? And what does the NBA play? 5-on-5 basketball. So you need to make that 5-on-5 experience top notch, and that includes being able to edit aspects of that. And you know that roster editing has not been NBA Live strong suit, if they've even had it in recent versions of their games. But no, and absolutely, I think they need to really focus on the NBA side of things. I think that they really need to make that 5-on-5 experience between NBA teams and whatnot. They need to make that shine. It needs to be really fun to play, and there needs to be still those differentiators in that authenticity.
At Nevermindme43, they need to use the base game as NBA Live 10. Use that as the base and implement changes to that. That's what they should be doing. If they do that and require 2 to 3 years, so be it. As a former NBA Live fan, I'd be more than happy with that. Yeah, once again, NBA Live 10 is kind of my baseline for fun and fluidity and enjoyment on the sticks. I do love 06 PC, but 10 does have some advancements there. I think Mike Wong, Baluba, was on some great ideas with what he was trying to implement there, and they just tossed it all out with Elite 11. As you noted, that it would be tough to use that as a base from a technical standpoint, but by reusing the concepts and the ideas and the general feel of Live 10, I think it would be great.
No, 100%. Live 10 stood out from a presentation perspective and then also from a gameplay perspective as far as easy to pick up and play, fun on sticks, etc. Obviously, they can't use the same engine, but like I said, they can use those ideas that they had. They can bring size ups back. They can bring some of that authenticity back that they had in that game. NBA Live 10 is just a really fun game to play in, and a lot of people speak fondly of it. I mean, I have an NBA Live 10 video that went up between, I think it was Lakers versus Celtics, and I put it up, I want to say, a year or two ago. And that video has over 10,000 views on YouTube. And if you look at the comments, I think TJ So Good is in there. And then, some people that listen to the podcast might be in there as well, but just a bunch of comments. People are talking really fondly about NBA Live 10 and about how good it looks, how great the atmosphere is, and how good the gameplay looks. So I see where he's coming from with NBA Live 10.
Next up, we have Grego Tin bring back the game on PC. Yeah, a lot of people are going to make that switch. As we said, J-23, My NBA mode. Also, the atmosphere of Live was always on point. I would love to see what they did with it. And yet, having that one deep mode, at least a franchise or career mode, I'd prefer a franchise mode. I'd prefer to go back to franchise and NBA Live, whether you call that franchise or Dynasty or whatever. You need that one deep mode on top of that great gameplay to keep people hooked, because it can't just be an exhibition game over and over again.
Give people the ability to create courts and create jerseys like NBA 2K's My NBA, right? Like, get people to get immersed in that road. Maybe they can relocate their team, rename their team, brand their team, all of that stuff. Allow them to create and share rosters, in the base game that people and themselves can bring in to that season mode and whatnot. Allow multi-team use, so people... maybe that's selfish for me, but I know big picture, a lot of people like doing that too. So, maybe, people can use multiple teams and play locally and use multiple teams in a season, etc. So many good things that NBA 2K did with My NBA and in my league prior. And that's why we play it every year in my household. And NBA Live needs to learn from that and be like, hey, there's a lot of people out there that want to play this mode, and they want to be able to get immersed in it. So they need to spend the time and resources in that.
Our friend, the Live King, at Steve from the Dot on Twitter, Steve, of course, just coming out is enough. I know Steve is passionate about NBA Live, obviously, the Live King and everything. And again, another content creator that EA absolutely needs to work with.
No, he's great. He makes a lot of great videos for NBA Live. And what I really like about the Live King is that he's not biased. He makes a lot of NBA 2K22 videos. He plays it a lot. He's submitted a ton of NBA 2K22 highlights for our NLSC top 10 plays of the week. He looks at these games very realistically, and he wants both companies to be great, right? Even though he is an EA content creator, etc. So technically, like, he's part of their creator network. I really appreciate him. We need more the Live Kings out there that just want great basketball video games, and they don't hold biases, and they just, they want people to be able to have choices, options, etc.
Next up, we have Darius Allen at DM Allen 5. Live 19 had a lot of good stuff on it. Their shoes, accessories, face scans were killing 2K. They just need to work on the players' body models and gameplay. Yeah, I mean, people wanted to give Live 19 a chance.
No, 100%. I think that a lot of people like the graphic approach to NBA Live 19. I actually wasn't as big of a fan of it as compared to NBA Live 16. I thought that Live 16 was a lot more alive. And obviously, Mike Breen and Van Gundy on the mic is far preferred over Jay Williams. But, I think that he touched on it right there as far as what's most important to people, right? Outside of depth, which is people really want depth in the game and stuff they can sink their teeth into, it's the gameplay, right? So the game can look great to somebody, but if it doesn't feel good on the sticks, they don't want to pick it up. So he wants it to be better gameplay wise, and I agree with it.
Philly I'm 2K switching to NBA Live, Unlikely, because I admire the graphics, face scans, the modes when developers work on it are also fine, historic players 2K has, and the opportunity 2K gives to create rosters, drafts, etc. Gameplay could be better, but this year's is not horrible. I create draft classes and rosters, so NBA Live has to convince me there as well, but if NBA Live made a return and is somewhat decent, it would be a win for all of us, because 2K has a reason to improve their game. Yeah, I mean, not being able to customize them and share rosters is a big issue in the past generation of NBA Live. That was a big miss as far as not having the roster editing until Live 18 in a post-release patch, and then losing some of the functionality, being able to trade players. You had to move them one by one to the free agents or assign them to a team in NBA Live 19 for whatever reason. That they took away the trade option, which is just ridiculous. And then, of course, there were so many bugs with it that you would, as people have mentioned, when they've tried to create new players, it just de-ages everybody and just wipes data randomly. So there's too many bugs. You can't have that, and you need the customization, and it needs to be functional and shareable.
What he's talking about is something that should be absolutely standard in every sports game that's released now. I mean, we're in 2022 here, right? Games have done it before. NBA 2K has been doing it for years. The whole being able to create a draft class, being able to do something as simple as create and share rosters, right? Like, how could that be, not in a game? Now, NBA Live 19 obviously released in 2018, but 2K was already doing that, right? Like, you already had the ability to do that. So obviously roster creators, who are they going to gravitate to? Are they going to gravitate to NBA 2K, or are they going to go to NBA Live 19 where they can't do it? They need to have the customization that should be standard in every sports game that's coming out now. And that's just so much. People pour hours into those rosters, right? They pour hours into those draft classes, and they love the fact that they can share them with other people, and they love the feedback they get when they share those with other people, etc. And they get to make other people's experiences with the game better. And then those people that they're sharing these rosters with, that gives those people an excuse to spend more time on the game, to jump on the game and download that roster that was created. So customization is incredibly important. And NBA Live, when it does come back, because I think it will, needs to have a really deep customization experience.
Limiki44 on Twitter, I miss NBA Live for real. I prefer it over 2K. And that, again, is something that the Live can take advantage of to some extent. I say take advantage, that sounds more ominous than I mean it to, but certainly tap into, if you will, that there is still that affection for the brand, that people will give it a chance.
Yeah, I think people associate NBA Live with a different style of gameplay, right? And I think that a lot of people out there still prefer that style that NBA Live was putting out, whether it be 18 or 19, because I kind of put those two together, and then I put 15 and 16 together, or it was 15 and 16, or going back to NBA Live 10, or maybe they have fond memories of NBA Live in the early 2000s, etc., which was the golden age, really, the mid-late 90s and then the early 2000s. So no, I see where he's coming from there, and there will be people out there that will jump on NBA Live right away if it comes out, because they still have that love for the brand.
And I'm just looking at the replies by quote tweets, and we have a lot of stuff that we've already covered. At Brother D says, revamp the whole AI, find a way to get the synergy stats, tendencies back in the game. That was big, obviously, synergy. A functional MyNBA mode, franchise mode, a PC port. At Be Like Dime, they would need to match the level of depth and attention to detail. Hard to beat that when it comes to 2K. At You Can Call Me Keys, I always thought Live had better natural motion animations. If they could get it right, the game could be epic. And J-23 also says, I just love their presentation. So yeah, it comes down to that. The presentation, the quality of gameplay, depth of modes and customization. It needs to be that really solid product to get people to make the switch. It needs that depth, and it needs that quality of the experience on the sticks, and it needs to make that great first impression.
No, 100%. And he talked about NBA Live 09's feature, the dynamic DNA, the tendencies and whatnot for the players in that game, and the daily updates and all of that stuff. That is still superior by far, actually, to what NBA 2K does, right? They do the roster updates from time to time, but they're not updating the rosters as often to be accurate to real life. So even like something like that would be really cool in a modern NBA Live, to bring back something like dynamic DNA, be like, hey, we're updating your game daily. Like, we're going to make sure that if for a month Ja Morant has decided to take less threes and he's taking it to the hole more, that in your game, when you download this dynamic update, Ja Morant is driving to the basket more and taking less threes, right? And maybe he's driving more to the right as opposed to the left. So when you play against Ja Morant, he's going to be driving more to the right. So stuff like that would still be over and above what 2K is putting out today. And I think that would be a great feature.
100%. I completely agree. And a common theme with these responses, Derek, is that there's interest in NBA Live. As much as people downplay that and say we don't need an alternative, and then they turn around and complain about 2K and wish they had something else to play, it shows that there is interest in NBA Live. And people talk about how the brand is damaged. And yes, it is an uphill battle. Don't get me wrong. It is going to be a huge uphill battle for NBA Live. If NBA Live 24 comes out next year, it's really going to have to bring it. Absolutely. But people want to give it a chance. And more people than some of the naysayers think.
No, a lot of positive responses there, and even people who are real 2K heads responded to this and were like, I would basically alluded to like, I would look at it. This is what they would need to do in order for me to look at it. All of that stuff. A lot of great responses, and I appreciate everybody who responded to the community question. I also want to point out, I don't think it's as big of an uphill battle as a lot of people are saying. And I disagree a little bit with you too on that. And that's fine. We have disagreements every now and then on the NLSC, and I definitely see where you're coming from. But I just think things can happen incredibly fast in this day and age because of all the things that I mentioned earlier. And 2K's already made a lot of missteps, but NBA Live has to bring it. Like, EA Sports has to bring it with the series, and they have to get hit on the points that I mentioned. They need to give people that customization, that experience. They need the deep franchise mode. They need to have the game be really strong from a gameplay perspective, and it needs to knock it out of the park visually as well, because that's going to be a big part of the marketing, is how the game looks and how fluid it is and all of that stuff. So I think that things can happen fast, and I hope that if NBA Live comes back, that they do incredibly well, and I hope that makes 2K up their game as well.
Definitely, that is the point of having choices, alternatives, and competition in the space. And it also depends where you set the bar. I mean, if it's being that better game than 2K, significantly better, outselling it, whatever, being perfect, no, that's an unreasonable bar. Being a game that some people, and more increasing number of people, want to play instead of or in addition to 2K, that's a reasonable bar, and that's something to aim for.
Right, exactly. And I don't expect them to knock it out of the park as far as like overtaking 2K in the first year. That's unrealistic. Right. But I do think that they can get a lot of people playing that game if they handle it correctly, even on the first year.
There's something to be said for viable alternatives, of course. But thank you so much for all of those responses. We love getting those responses every week to the mailbag. And this week, again, Derek, we got so many that we had to make it a main topic, not just a quick mailbag.
No, I really appreciate everybody. Thank you for tuning into the show. Thank you for listening to Andrew and I every single week. And please leave comments for us either on the YouTube video or on Apple Podcasts. Please give us a rating if you like the show. And we'd love to hear from you.
And of course, we will have a new mailbag prompt out next week as well. Might be talking about the what-if scenarios, Derek, or maybe what is retro gaming. You know, there's a lot of fun topics. We never run out of topics here to talk about on the NLSC podcast.
It never gets old either.
Nope.
Right? We're talking about something that we love and that we, could talk endlessly about. So no, it definitely doesn't get old.
But with that being said, that has brought us to the end of episode number 435 of the NLSC podcast. We thank you for tuning in. Once again, the podcast comes out every week on the NLSC, nb-live.com, of course, as well as all major podcatching apps and platforms, and our YouTube channel. And again, if you'd like to leave us a review, we'd certainly appreciate that. And of course, we'd love to connect with you on social media as well. So as always, Derek, I'll throw it over to you to share your handles.
You can reach me on Twitter at D4Free84 or at D4Free-G. I am on the NLSC, D4Free, and I'm also on YouTube, D4Free. And hey, I am on IG. I don't use it that often, but that's also D4Free84.
I'm Andrew in the forum and Andrew NLSC on Twitter. The NLSC is on Twitter and Facebook at the NLSC. We are NLSC Basketball on Instagram. Our aforementioned YouTube channel is youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. And of course, keep it locked to the NLSC itself, nba-live.com, for everything we do for basketball video games. But yes, that's all for this week. So thank you once again for tuning in. Until next time, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Derek.
Go get buckets, everyone.